That's how Wasn't Study number 13 begins. And you wouldn't be watching this video if you didn't want some help with the preparation of the Kentucky 2020 All-State Bassoon Audition music, of which part of this is included. You all have been asked to start, I think, in the 28th measure or 29th measure of this after a fermata. But that's the way the piece begins, and where you guys are going to begin, it has exactly the same first couple of bars. So let's think about this for a second. You've been given the instruction to start there in the middle of the piece, and you've been given a tempo marking. That tempo marking was 148 or faster. I'm going to set my metronome at 150, if I can get there. All right, so there's 150, rounding it up a little bit. Let me play the same music. I feel a little bit constrained by the metronome at that pace. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide that 150 by 3 so that the metronome now is going to click once per measure. So we're setting it on 50. And I'll play the same music. For me, I feel freer to express the music. I feel like there are longer spans to be thinking. I don't feel so much in the box of beat, beat, beat. I would really highly recommend that you try this when you practice. And some metronomes only go down to 40, but that still gives you some room for practicing this once you learn more of the notes. I should have said earlier, I'm Peter Simpson, professor of bassoon at the University of Kentucky, and I'm hoping to help you a little bit with this video. I'm just going to give you a few ideas. So that was one. Another thing we notice about the beginning of this and the beginning of the part you have to play is that it starts with a rest. So that feels a little bit different from many pieces. We notice though, after you begin, this scale is headed for sort of a goal, a downbeat, a longer note, happens to be E above the staff, 2 bars later. So this trajectory, it's as if we have a really long pickup to that note. If I were to start not really thinking about the context of the music, if I just played this, if I played it's really hard to tell what the meter is, whether it sounds like I started on a downbeat because I just kind of slammed into it. So this is a little bit of a challenge. When you come in, you don't want to be too loud on the first note. You want it to speak, of course, but not too loud. Then maybe even drop back a little bit after that. Stay relatively soft, and then crescendo into that goal note. I'll do it slowly for you, so something like this. So that ending particularly, you could hear me crescendoing into that E. That really gives the listener clear orientation about what was going on, okay? Right after that, starting with the second note, in the next measure, we have a trajectory of a scale going down for 2 measures to a goal. So starting on high A, so we basically turn around the direction. We go up to a goal, jump up to a high note, and go down to a goal by a step. Then we're going to leap down and do a similar thing. We're going to go up a scale to another goal. We're going to leap up again. Right? So there's a pattern to this beginning. And when you're playing this, you want to express those changes from trajectory up to a goal, leap up, trajectory down to a goal, leap down, trajectory up to a goal. So if I were to do this with breaks in between those, we might have something like this. I'll go a little slower. So we have that sort of division going on, except that in the real playing of the piece, you don't get to stop between those two things. Another challenge here is that in the higher spots, Mr. Wesmore has got 3 notes slurred, so it seems as if you slur over that break. So what I would suggest there, I'll do the first one for you, is if I go the first couple of bars that you're playing, starting in the A, if I go to that E, I'm thinking of that E as an arrival point. So I'm going to give it the tiniest amount of more length than a regular 8th note. Then when I go to the high A, I'm going to actually play it a little softer than the E. You'll hear this, so a little slower. See what I mean? The next trajectory is similar, except the 3 notes that are slurred, they sound a little more striking than the first 3 that were slurred, the E to A to G. That sounds a little bit more normal. So because this sounds more striking, I'm going to give it more sound. From low F. And what I did there was I kind of slowed all 3 of those notes down a little bit to highlight them some. Now let me put this into context. We'll go back to the metronome on. And what I hope to demonstrate here is that I'm going to be a little bit flexible. I will not always be exactly with the metronome, but I should come out with it. Here we go. So there was a little flexibility in there and give and take in the tempo. I wouldn't have easily done that if the metronome was beating on every quarter note. Other material in this includes some arpeggios, chord outlines, sounding, for example, like this. And that's a little bit awkward on the bassoon. If I were to play those same notes in order, that's a little bit easier to negotiate. But these leaps make it a little tougher. So you have to practice that. One thing you could do while you're getting used to those leaps and playing all the notes, you could simplify the passage. Here's my 1 per beat. What I'm going to do is simply play every other note in that same passage as a quarter note. Sounds like this. That you can do quite easily. So if you did that every time those arpeggios with the broken chords occurred, you can get a sense of the flow of the music as you're working slower on working out the fingerings and so forth for those other things. While I think of it, don't forget that when we get to notes, say A at the top of the staff, B, C, perhaps D, those notes, in order to be attacked cleanly, require that you use some of these keys, like the high A key and the high C key. Hopefully those of you that have a teacher have learned about this, but be disciplined about it, and you almost use those as octave keys, and that'll clean up the attacks. Later in the piece, before the fermata, there's a passage that goes a little bit like this. I'll just play part of it. Etc. So in this one, we have some chord outlines in order, but they're followed by large leaps. Those leaps can be a little bit challenging. So one way to practice this is to give yourself extra time. So Let me actually set the metronome on quarter note beats as if you were practicing it slowly. So I've got set on 100. You could do something like this. And you could gradually speed the tempo up on that. This would be a good way for you to learn to adjust your embouchure for those big leaps down. That passage is approaching, what we call a cadence, sort of a dramatic stopping point in the piece. And then we go back to the material that you began with, that stuff. This is kind of an important spot in the whole piece, and it feels as if we're going back to the beginning, what in music we call a recapitulation. You've been playing for a while, especially if you start at the beginning of the study, and you might feel like you really are having trouble with your air, you really want more breath at this point. One thing you could do is alter the tempo, and I understand that this is not written in the music, but I'm going to demonstrate this for you. And I hope you'll agree that this really sounds okay. And I think anyone judging you would think that this is an okay solution. So here we go. Back a few bars before that cadence. So what I did basically is I slowed down into the cadence, That gives me more time to take a breath. And then rather than simply starting immediately out tempo, I use the scale as a accelerando. And I'm out tempo at that point. So it gives you a little extra time to breathe. And I think it's also kind of interesting musically. And since we've had that same scale before, it makes it sound a little more interesting, novel at that point. Okay, finally, at the very end of right after that scale, you go, etc. So this business that may be a little bit awkward for some of you. Another practice technique you could do here is to simplify it a little. I'm going to play you my simplified version. So that would be a way to sort of get a sense for the music and the trajectory of it as you're working out all the notes. So I hope that gives you some ideas for practice. I actually have a PDF file of what I've been playing for you, these simplifications and divisions in the music and extra rests, etc. I'm hopeful that those of you getting this video will also have access to this online. If you don't see how to get it, you can email me at peter.simpson@uky.edu and I will send you one. Thanks.